I have told this story more times than I can count, and every time I begin the same way. I was standing 40 paces from the man when they threw him off the flight line, and I did not know I was looking at the greatest pilot our kingdom had ever produced. None of us did. That was the whole point of it, though I would not understand that until the sky opened up behind him, and the answer landed on the tarmac at 200 knots. My name is Corin Vale. In those days I was a first-year cadet at the Crown Aviation Academy at Wren's Reach, 19 years old, all elbows and ambition, and I believed I understood the world of flight because I had memorized the manuals. I could recite the stall speeds of every trainer in the hangar. I could name every campaign ribbon on every officer who walked the parade square. What I could not do, what none of us green boys could do, was tell the difference between a man who was empty and a man who was simply quiet. We assumed they were the same thing. We were wrong about that in the worst possible way, and the kingdom nearly let a legend walk out its front gate carrying his own kit bag because of it. It was the last morning of the winter intakes evaluation week, and the wind coming off the estuary was cold enough to make the flags on the mast crack like whips. The whole academy had been mustered onto the apron in front of the main hangar, 300 cadets in gray flight suits, the instructors in their dark blue, the ground crews standing off to the side in their coveralls, with their arms folded against the chill. We had been told there would be an announcement. We had been told a senior officer of the Sky Command was visiting. We were excited the way young men are excited by anything that breaks the routine, and we lined up in our ranks and stamped our feet and had no idea we were about to watch a public execution of a man's honor. The man's name, as far as any of us knew it, was Corin Vale. He was not one of us. That much was obvious even before anyone said a word about him. He was older, for one thing. I put him at 40, maybe a hard 45, though later I learned he was younger than he looked, and that the years had been pressed into him by other means. He stood a head taller than most, broad through the shoulders in a way that had nothing to do with the gym and everything to do with a body that had done real work. His flight suit was the plain gray of a recruit like the rest of us, with none of the colored tabs or squadron patches the rest of the intake had begun to accumulate, and it hung on him wrong, too new, the creases still sharp from the quartermaster's shelf. But it was his stillness that set him apart. 300 of us fidgeted and whispered and shifted our weight. Corin Vale stood at the end of the front rank like something that had been carved there. His eyes were forward. His hands were at his sides. He did not look cold. He did not look anything. There was a scar along the left side of his jaw, thin and pale, running down into his collar. And there was his hand, his right hand, which he kept curled just slightly, the way a man holds a hand that no longer opens all the way. I noticed it because I noticed everything about him. We all did. The rumor about Corin Vale had been running through the barracks for 3 weeks, and the rumor was cruel and it was simple. He was the washout. The old man who had somehow talked his way into the Crown's flagship pilot program and could not keep up. The one who flew like he was afraid of the aircraft. The one Wing Commander Locke had marked for the door before the intake was a week old. I believed the rumor. God forgive me, I believed every word of it because I was 19 and because the man who told it to us was the most powerful officer any of us had ever stood near. Wing Commander Corin Locke was the flight master of the academy, and he was, in the narrow and glittering world of Wren's Reach, a god. He was everything a boy of 19 imagines a fighter pilot to be. He was lean and golden and quick, with a jaw you could have used to open envelopes and a smile he deployed like a weapon. His flight suit fit him the way armor fit the knights in the old paintings in the mess hall. He wore the aviator's dark glasses even on gray days, pushed up into his fair hair, and when he walked the line the cadets straightened without being told. He had flown, we were assured, in every theater worth flying in. He had commanded a squadron. He had the ear of the court, of the queen consort herself. It was whispered. for it was her patronage that had built the new academy and her name on the charter that hung in gold in the entrance hall, and it was understood by everyone that Wing Commander Locke was her man, the face she had chosen to put on the front of her most expensive and most public project. When the Queen Consort wanted the kingdom to see that the crown made the finest pilots in the world, Perrin Locke was the man she pointed the cameras at. That morning he walked out onto the apron with a data slate under his arm and 2 junior instructors trailing him like gun dogs, and he did not go to the microphone at the front of the muster. He went, instead, directly to the end of the front rank. He went directly to Corin Vale. "Recruit Vale," he said, and he said it loudly, the way you say a thing you want 300 people to hear. "Step out." Corin Vale stepped out of the rank. 1 pace, a clean about face, and he stood at attention facing the wing commander with the whole academy watching. He was taller than Locke. I remember that clearly, because Locke did not like it, and Locke adjusted for it the way small-souled men do, by taking half a step closer so that he had to look up, so that the closeness became a kind of aggression instead of a disadvantage. "You've had your evaluation week," Locke said. "You've had every hour of instruction this academy owes a recruit, and more, because I am a fair man and I gave you the benefit of every doubt 3 times over. Do you know what your instructors have written about you, Vale?" "No, sir." His voice was low and even. It did not carry the way Locke's did. It did not try to. "Hesitant." Locke read it off the slate, though I would wager my commission he had it memorized. "Reluctant to commit the aircraft. Aborts maneuvers other cadets complete without complaint. Flies as though afraid." He let the last word sit in the cold air. "Afraid, Vale, in the Crown's own academy. Do you have any idea how many young men and women would give a decade of their lives to stand where you are standing in that flight suit, with the estuary in front of them and a squadron in their future, and you fly as though afraid?" Somewhere in the ranks behind me someone laughed. It was quickly stifled, but it carried, and I saw Locke's mouth curve at the corner. He had wanted that laugh. He had staged all of this for it. 2 days ago, Locke went on, warming now, walking a slow half-circle around the older man so that Vale had to hold his eyes forward and could not follow him. 2 days ago I set the intake a formation exercise. A simple thing. 4 aircraft, a diamond, a pass over the field, a break. The kind of thing you'll fly in your sleep by the time I'm done with the ones who stay. And Recruit Vale here, he lifted his voice for the crowd, Recruit Vale broke formation, pulled up and away. Aborted his run over the field with the cameras rolling and the intake's families watching from the stands. Left a hole in my diamond in front of the hole of Wren's reach. He stopped, directly in front of Vale again, and dropped his voice into something almost gentle, which was worse. "Why did you do that, Vale? Tell them all why the old man couldn't hold his line." I was close enough to see Corin Vale's throat move. I thought then that it was fear. I understand now that it was the particular effort it takes a disciplined man to keep from answering a question he could answer very, very well. "There was a ground crew on the field, sir," Vale said. "Below the break point. Refueling Bowser, 3 men. My run would have carried my jet wash across them at low level. I judged the risk unacceptable and I climbed." "You judged?" Locke smiled wide and easy and turned to the crowd as though Vale had just proven his entire case for him. "He judged. Do you hear that? A recruit, a first intake recruit, decided he knew better than the exercise. Decided he knew better than the range safety plan. Decided that the men on that field, professional ground crew who have worked this apron for 20 years and know to a second when to be clear of it, needed a recruit to protect them." He shook his head slowly, performing sorrow. "This is what I mean when I say afraid, cadets. Not afraid of the ground. Afraid of the moment. Afraid to commit. A pilot who second-guesses his run kills himself and everyone flying off his wing. I would rather graduate a bold fool than a careful coward, because the bold fool can be taught and the coward cannot be trusted. And so..." He held out the data slate. One of the junior instructors produced a single sheet of stiff paper, cream-colored, embossed at the top with the Academy's crest and the Queen Consort's cipher, and Locke took it and held it up so the crest caught what little light there was. Recruit Corin Vale, by the authority vested in me as Flight Master of the Crown Aviation Academy, you are hereby found unsuited to continue in flight training and are dismissed from this intake, effective immediately. You will surrender your flight suit and your access to the air side of this establishment, and you will be off the base by noon. He held the paper out. Take it. Corin Vale took the paper. He did not look at it. He folded it once precisely along a crease and held it at his side, and he said, "Yes, sir," in exactly the same even voice he had used for everything else, and that even voice was the most humiliating thing about the whole morning because it gave Locke nothing. There was no crack in it to widen. There was no tremor for the crowd to feed on. The man simply took the ruin of what we all believed was his last chance at the sky and folded it up like a laundry list. And Locke, who had wanted a broken man to display and had been given a mountain instead, could not leave it there. That was his mistake, though none of us knew yet how large a mistake it was. He should have let Vale walk. Instead, he had to win, all the way, in front of everyone. And so he said the thing that I have replayed in my mind 1,000 times since, the thing that the whole kingdom would eventually hear repeated back to him. "Look at him," Locke said to us, jerking his chin at Vale. "Take a good long look, cadets, because this is the shape of a man who thought wanting the sky was the same as deserving it. You'll meet 100 of them in your careers, old men with a boy's dream and no gift to back it. He'll tell people one day that he trained here, that he almost flew for the crown." Locke smiled his weapon of a smile. "Almost. Now clear my flight line, Vale. You're standing on ground that's meant for pilots." The wind cracked the flags. 300 cadets held their breath. And Corin Vale looked at Wing Commander Perrin Locke for one long moment. Not with anger, I would swear to that in any court, not with anything I could name. And then he executed a parade ground about face so clean it could have been machined, and he began to walk toward the gate, alone, the folded paper in his ruined right hand. He got perhaps 20 paces. That was when the sound reached us. At first I thought it was the wind changing, a low thrum on the edge of hearing, felt in the breastbone more than heard in the ear. Then it climbed, and it was not the wind. It was nothing any of us had heard on that apron before, not the whistle of the trainers, not the workmanlike drone of the transport that brought the mail. This was a sound with a spine of thunder in it, a hard, clean roar that came in low over the estuary and doubled again, until the hangar windows sang in their frames and every head on the apron. 300 cadets and a dozen instructors and the golden wing commander himself turned as one toward the water. Something was inbound, something fast and low and ours. I could see the crown's colors on it even at that distance, a slash of deep blue and gold along a fuselage shaped like nothing in our hangars, like nothing in our manuals. A swept dark dart of an aircraft that seemed to bend the gray morning around itself as it came. It flashed the length of the field 100 feet up, close enough that the roar of it hit us like a physical wave and half the front rank flinched. And then it stood on one wing in a turn so tight and so violent that I heard a ground crew chief behind me swear in pure disbelief. And it came around, and it lined up on the long runway, and it began, with impossible grace, to descend. It was going to land, here, now, behind the man Wing Commander Locke had just called a coward. And Corin Vale, 20 paces toward the gate, stopped walking. He did not turn around. He stood with his back to all of us and his face to the sea, and he tilted his head very slightly at the sound of that engine the way a man tilts his head at a voice he has not heard in a long time and had never expected to hear again. To understand what landed on our runway that morning, and why it changed everything, you have to understand where it came from, and I did not learn most of this until later in pieces, from men who had reason to know. But I will give it to you now, in order, the way I have learned to tell it, because the whole meaning of the day depends on knowing what we were all too ignorant to know while it was happening. The aircraft was called the Stormcrest. Its full designation was the Tempest-X, and until 3 months before that morning, almost no one outside the innermost circle of the Sky Command had ever seen one, because there were only 2 of them in existence, and both had been built in a hangar with no windows behind a fence. No cadet was ever going to be shown. It was the most advanced interceptor the kingdom had ever built, a single-seat fighter with a thrust that could stand it on its tail and hold it there, a skin that shed radar the way a duck sheds water, and a flight envelope so far beyond the trainers we flew that comparing them was like comparing a racehorse to a rocking chair. It was the future the Crown had bet its treasury on. And it had a problem, which was the reason for everything that followed, and the problem was this. It flew at the very edge of what a human body could survive, and in 18 months of testing, exactly 1 living pilot had ever taken it to that edge and brought it home again in one piece. The engineers had a private name for the maneuver that killed their test pilots and spared that one man. They called it the Ashfall turn. They called it that because of the pilot's call sign. His call sign was Ashfall. And here I have to stop and go back further, because you cannot understand the Ashfall turn without understanding the Straits, and you cannot understand what the Sky Marshal did on our apron that morning without understanding the Straits. And the Straits are the reason a scarred old recruit with a ruined hand knew the voice of that engine before the rest of us knew what we were looking at. 6 years earlier, I was a boy of 13 then, and I remember the day the news came the way everyone my age remembers it. The royal flight had been crossing the Kesar Straits on the return leg of a state visit. It was a routine crossing over water that had been quiet for a generation. On board the lead aircraft were the Crown Prince Rowan, then barely out of his own training, and half the senior court, and the flight was escorted by a pair of the old interceptors that were the best we had in those days, which was not, it turned out, nearly good enough. Because over the Straits, in weather, out of a bank of cloud that the escort's radar had reported as empty, came 4 aircraft that were not ours and were not friendly, and had come a very long way with a very clear purpose. And in the space of 90 seconds, a routine crossing became the worst hour in the modern history of the Crown's air service. I will not pretend I know the details the way the men who flew it know them. But the shape of it is a matter of record now, insofar as any of it has been allowed to become record, and the shape of it is this. One of the 2 escorts was hit in the first pass and went into the sea. The other, a single interceptor, an aging airframe, flown by a young officer whose name the kingdom was not permitted to know for 6 years, put himself between the royal flight and 4 hostile aircraft over open water in cloud alone, and he did not leave. He fought them for 11 minutes. 11 minutes is a span of time that means nothing to you sitting in a warm room, and means an eternity beyond human reckoning to a man alone in a cockpit with the airframe screaming, and 4 enemies trying to kill the people behind him. He drove 2 of them into the sea. He damaged a 3rd so badly it turned for home and did not make it. The 4th broke off, and he did all of it, the record says in its dry official language, while sustaining progressive battle damage and a cockpit fire, which is the Sky Command's way of saying that for the last 4 of those 11 minutes, the man was flying an aircraft that was coming apart around him and burning him alive. The royal flight crossed the Straits, the Crown Prince came home, and the pilot who had bought them that crossing brought his ruined aircraft down onto a strip of coast, rode at a speed no one should survive, and walked away from it, walked, they say. Though how is a mystery the doctors never fully solved, with the fire's mark burned down the left side of his jaw, and his right hand cooked into a claw where he had held the controls through the flames rather than let go and lose the fight. He was 26 years old. His call sign was Ashfall. And the Crown, in the way of crowns handling things too dangerous and too politically raw to place in the open, for the state visit had been delicate, and the identity of the aggressor a matter of quiet fury behind closed doors, and the last thing anyone wanted was a public hero whose very existence advertised how close the royal flight had come to the sea. The crown gave him its highest decoration in a room with no press and its deepest gratitude in private, and then it sealed the whole affair. The pilot's name and the pilot's face and the pilot's very record, behind a classification so total that the man ceased, officially, to exist as a pilot at all. The board that reviewed his injuries wrote that he would never fly a combat aircraft again. The nerve damage in the hand was real. The surgeons had given him 3 fingers that half-worked and told him to be grateful for those. And so the pilot they called Ashfall was retired from the air service at 27. With a medal, he could not show anyone, and a hand that would not close, and a silence around his own past that he had accepted as the price of the people he had saved. He did not, as it happened, leave the crown's service. A man like that does not know how to stop serving. He took the only post that would have him, a post that asked nothing of the hand and everything of the discipline, and he became, of all things, a royal guard, one of the still, silent figures in the red tunic and the tall bearskin who stand the palace posts and are looked at by 1,000 tourists a day and seen by none of them. For 6 years, the greatest combat pilot the kingdom had ever produced stood a guardsman's watch at the palace gate, and held his rifle in a hand that could barely close around it, and told no one, and asked for nothing, and let the world believe he was exactly what he appeared to be, which was furniture. I have thought about that a great deal in the years since. I have thought about what it takes for a man to hold that much and show nothing. It is, I have come to believe, the same thing that made him climb his aircraft away from 3 ground crew. He did not know rather than complete a maneuver that would have looked good for the cameras. The kingdom mistook it twice for weakness. It was the opposite of weakness. It was the thing weakness has never once in the history of the world been able to counterfeit. Now, how does a man like that end up a first intake recruit at Wren's Reach, standing in a line of 19-year-olds, being called a coward by Perrin Locke? That is the part that took me longest to learn, and it is the part that turns the whole story from a tragedy into something else, and I had it in the end from the Sky Marshal's own aide, a captain named Faraday who had no business telling me, and told me anyway one night because the story was too good to hold. The Stormcrest program was dying. That was the secret at the heart of it. The 2 prototypes were flying, and they were miracles, and they were killing the men sent to fly them, because the airframe could do things no trained pilot could survive doing. The turn the engineers called Ashfall, above all, a maneuver that pulled forces through a pilot's body at the ragged edge of blackout, the very maneuver by which the real Ashfall had once killed 2 enemies over the Straits. The program needed to prove that the aircraft could be flown by a human being, taught to human beings, made into a weapon the crown could actually field, or the treasury was going to cancel it, and the 2 miracles were going to become 2 very expensive museum pieces. And the man the Sky Command wanted, the only living man who had flown the Ashfall turn in anger and lived, was retired, medically grounded, and standing a palace post with a hand the medical board had condemned. So the Sky Marshal went to see him. Halden Cray, the Marshal of the Sky Command, an old warhorse who had pinned the sealed medal on Ashfall's chest 6 years before in that pressless room and had never forgotten him, went in person to the palace and stood in front of a guardsman at his post and asked him, not ordered, asked whether the hand that had held an aircraft through fire might hold one more. And here is the thing that tells you everything about Corin Vale. He did not say yes, not to glory, not to a second life in the sky, not even to the Marshal he revered. What he said, according to Faraday, was that he would not accept a place in the Stormcrest program on the strength of a legend. He had been a legend once, and it had nearly cost the Crown Prince's life, because legends make men reckless and the men around them careless. If he was going to fly again, if his body could even do it, which no one knew, he would earn the seat the way any pilot earned it, from the bottom, in an academy, under an instructor who did not know his name, tested against the standard like anyone else. No favors, no sealed records open to smooth his path. He would enroll as a recruit, under his own plain name, with his history classified out of the files so completely that the academy would see only a scarred older man with a bad hand and a wish to fly, and he would let them judge him on what he showed them and nothing else. If he failed by that honest measure, he told the Marshal, then he had no business in the Stormcrest, and better to learn it in a trainer than over the sea. The Sky Marshal, who understood men, agreed. And that is how the greatest pilot in the kingdom came to be enrolled at Wren's Reach as recruit Corin Vale, with a file scrubbed of everything that mattered, placed under the authority of a flight master named Perrin Locke, a man who had never in his gilded life flown anything more dangerous than a public airshow, and who took one look at the scarred, quiet, hard-handed old recruit who would not show off for the cameras, and decided he had found the perfect washout to make an example of. None of us knew any of that, standing on the apron in the cold. We only knew that the impossible aircraft was on its final approach, and that the man Locke had just ordered off the flight line had stopped walking, and had turned his ruined face toward the sound of it, and that Wing Commander Perrin Locke had gone the strange gray color of a man who has begun, a few seconds too late, to be afraid. The Stormcrest came down like something that had decided the ground was optional and was descending only to be polite. It flared over the numbers with its nose high and its belly to us, and I heard the ground crew chief behind me say, very quietly, "That's not a landing, that's a courtesy." And I understood him even though I did not have the words yet, because there was in the way that aircraft touched the runway a total, effortless command that made everything I had watched Locke do in a trainer for 3 weeks look like a boy showing off on a bicycle. The wheels kissed. The nose came down. And the great dark dart of it rolled out and slowed and turned at the far end, and began to taxi back toward us up the length of the field, and the roar of it dropped to a hard, steady thunder that you felt in your teeth, and the whole academy stood rooted and silent and watched it come. It stopped 100 feet from the muster, square in front of the main hangar, square in front of all of us. The engine wound down through a register of sounds no trainer had ever made. The canopy, a single blister of gold-tinted glass, cracked at its seam and lifted, and a ladder unfolded from the fuselage, and a pilot climbed down. Not the Sky Marshal, a test pilot, young in a pressure suit, who reached the tarmac and did something that made 300 cadets forget how to breathe. He came to attention, and he turned not toward Wing Commander Locke, not toward the reviewing party, not toward the academy staff. He turned toward the lone gray figure standing 20 paces short of the gate with a folded dismissal in his hand, and he saluted him, held it. A young frontline pilot in a pressure suit, fresh out of the most advanced aircraft in the kingdom, holding a parade salute to a man Perrin Locke had just called furniture. And then the staff cars came through the gate. There were 3 of them, dark and unmarked, and they swept onto the apron and stopped in a line, and men got out of them, senior men, gray men, men whose shoulder boards I could not read at that distance but whose bearing I could, the bearing of people who are obeyed everywhere they go, and at the center of them, unmistakable even to a first-year cadet who had only ever seen him in the newspapers, was Sky Marshal Halden Cray. He was old and square and iron gray, with a face like a cliff the sea has been working on for 70 years, and he wore the full dark blue of the Sky Command with a single ribbon at his breast that I did not recognize and would not, in fact, learn the meaning of until much later, because it was one that was almost never worn where anyone could see it. He did not hurry. Men like that never hurry. He walked out onto the apron with his staff around him, and his eyes went once briefly to Wing Commander Locke, who had come to attention so hard I thought he might sprain something, and who had arranged his face into its most brilliant and most confident welcome, and the Sky Marshal's eyes passed over Perrin Locke the way your eyes pass over a lamppost. He did not stop. He walked straight past the flight master of the academy, past the reviewing stand, past 300 cadets, and he went to Corin Vale. I was near enough to hear it. I have thanked God many times that I was near enough to hear it, because it is the part no one believes when I tell it, and it is the part I would not have believed either if I had heard it second-hand. The Sky Marshal stopped in front of the scarred gray recruit, and the old warhorse of the entire air service of the Crown came to attention, and he saluted him first. "Ashfall," he said, just that, in a voice roughened by 50 years of engines and grief. "They told me you were here. They did not tell me I would find you walking toward the gate." And Corin Vale, Ashfall, returned the salute with his ruined right hand, brought it up slow and held it steady and said, "Marshal, I was dismissed from the intake this morning, sir. I'm to be off the base by noon." You could have heard a coin drop on that apron. 300 cadets and a dozen instructors and the Golden Wing commander, and every one of us was leaning into those words trying to make them mean something other than what they plainly meant, and none of us could. And into that silence the Sky Marshal turned, slowly, deliberately, the way a gun turret turns, and looked at Perrin Locke for the first time as though he had noticed he existed. "Dismissed," the Sky Marshal said. "By whom?" Locke's confident welcome had begun to slide off his face like paint in the rain, but he was a performer, and a performer will keep going long after the audience has turned, and so he stepped forward and produced the smile and produced the voice, the warm, confident, carrying voice that had ruled Wren's Reach for a year. "Sky Marshal Cray, sir, it's an honor. Wing Commander Perrin Locke, Flight Master of the Academy. There's been, if I may, sir, there's clearly been some confusion. Recruit Vale was dismissed from the winter intake this morning on my authority, following a full evaluation. His flying was assessed as hesitant and unsafe. He aborted a formation exercise, sir, broke my diamond over the field, and I made the determination that he was unsuited to continue. Had I known there was any special interest in the recruit from the command, naturally I would have." "Unsafe," the Sky Marshal repeated. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The apron was so silent that his quiet carried to the last rank. "You assessed his flying as unsafe." "Yes, sir, I did." "Wing Commander." Cray took a step toward him, and it was not a large step, but Locke gave ground before it without seeming to know he had. "Do you know why he aborted your formation run?" "He claimed there was ground crew on the field, sir, but the range plan." "There were 3 men on the field." A new voice, one of the gray men from the staff cars, a lean colonel with a data slate, reading from it flatly. "Fuel section, servicing the number 2 Bowser, cleared onto the apron at 0840 by the duty controller. Their clearance and the formation window overlapped by 90 seconds. It's in your own range log, Wing Commander. A low pass at the assigned brake altitude would have carried jet wash directly across their position." The colonel looked up. "Recruit Vale climbed away from 3 men who were where they should not have been, and your evaluation recorded it as a failure of nerve." I watched Perrin Locke's mouth open and find nothing in it. "The range plan is the pilot's responsibility to read against the field," the Sky Marshal said. "And the field is the pilot's responsibility to read against his conscience. And a man who will climb his aircraft away from a maneuver that would kill 3 strangers he has never met, in front of cameras, with his own career in the balance and an instructor screaming at him to hold his line, that man, Wing Commander, is not the coward in this story." He let it stand. Then he turned his back on Locke, wholly, a gesture more final than any word, and faced the academy, faced all 300 of us, and the instructors and the ground crews, and he raised his weathered voice for the first time so that it rolled the length of the apron. "You have been told," Cray said, "that this man could not fly. I am the Marshal of the Sky Command of the Crown, and I have come here this morning to correct the record, because the record has been permitted to lie about him for 6 years, and I find I have no more stomach for it. You will listen, and then you will decide for yourselves who has been standing at the end of your front rank." And he told us. Not all of it, some of it is sealed to this day, but enough. He told us about the Straits. He told us about a young officer, alone in cloud over water, 11 minutes, 4 aircraft, the royal flight passing safe behind him and the crown prince coming home to us because one man would not leave his post in the sky. He told us about the fire, and the coast road, and the hand, and the medal given in a silent room, and the name sealed away because the times were dangerous, and a crown could not afford a hero whose existence advertised its own near catastrophe. He told us, and here his old voice did something, thickened for a moment and then mastered itself, that the man had not asked to be repaid for any of it, had not asked for the seal to be lifted, had gone and stood a palace watch for 6 years with a hand that would not close and told no one, and had come to this academy not on the strength of what he had done, but under a plain name and a scrubbed file, insisting on being tested like any recruit. Because he would not let a legend put him in a cockpit he had not earned twice over. He asked us to hide his name from you, the Sky Marshal said. He asked to be judged only on what he showed you here. And so I ask you now, cadets, instructors, all of you, what did he show you? His gray eyes swept the apron. He showed you a man who would rather be called a coward in front of 300 people than kill 3 strangers for the sake of a formation. That is what you saw, and you did not have the eyes to read it. I do not blame the boys. His gaze found Locke and stopped, and hardened into something you could have struck a spark off. I blame the man who was paid to have the eyes and did not. I thought that was the end of it. I was 19. I thought a Sky Marshal saying a thing out loud made it so, the way a verdict makes a thing so, and that Wing Commander Locke would fold up as neatly as Corin Vale had folded that cream-colored sheet, and the morning would resolve into the clean shape of a wrong put right. I did not yet understand that a man like Perrin Locke is not undone by the truth. He is only undone by the truth in front of people who matter more than the people the truth is about. And there was, standing at the edge of the reviewing party the whole time, one such person, and Locke had already begun to play to her. She had come out of the second staff car, and I had not marked her at first because she was quiet and unhurried and dressed without display. But the gray men made a space around her that they made around no one but the Sky Marshal himself, and when she moved toward the center of things, the academy staff bent toward her like reeds. This was Princess Adela, the king's sister, and she was, though I did not know the office by its name then, the royal patron whose signature shared the academy's charter with the queen consorts, and she had come to Wren's Reach that morning for what was supposed to be a proud ceremony, and had walked instead into the middle of a reckoning. She had a still face and clear eyes, and she had been listening to every word the Sky Marshal said with an attention that missed nothing. And Locke turned to her. That was his instinct, and it was a shrewd one, because he could not appeal to the Sky Marshal who had already crushed him, but the Academy did not answer to the Sky Marshal in the end. It answered to its patrons, and its patrons were the court, and the court, everyone at Wren's Reach understood, meant in the first place the queen consort, whose cipher was on the dismissal in Corin Vale's hand, whose money had raised the hangers, and whose chosen man Perrin Locke was. "Your Highness," Locke said, and his voice had found a new register, wounded and reasonable, the voice of a loyal servant appealing over the head of an unfair judge. "Princess Adela, I welcome the Sky Marshal's account, and no man honors the sacrifice at the Straits more than I do. But I must speak for this academy which the crown entrusted to my charge. The standard here is the standard, Your Highness. It does not bend for a man's past, however glorious. Recruit Vale broke a formation exercise. Whatever his reasons, whatever he was 6 years ago, on the day I evaluated him, he did not meet the standard I am sworn to hold. And if I bend that standard now, under pressure, in public, because a hero has arrived in a beautiful aircraft, then I teach 300 cadets that reputation flies the jet and discipline does not. Surely that cannot be what the command wants. Surely the Queen Consort's Academy must be seen to hold its line." It was, I have to admit, cleverly done. He had reframed his cruelty as principle. He had made the correction of his mistake look like the corruption of a standard. And I saw 2 or 3 of the junior instructors, men who owed their posts to Locke, nod, because it sounded right, because it wears the costume of rigor, and I felt the morning certainty wobble, and I saw the Sky Marshal's jaw set, because Cray was a soldier and not a courtier, and he had just been outflanked on ground he did not know how to fight on. Into that wobble quietly came the Princess Adela's voice. "Wing Commander Locke," she said, "you keep saying the standard. I would like to be very clear about which standard you mean, because there seem to be two of them on this apron and they cannot both be it." She did not raise her voice either. It seemed to run in the family. "There is the standard that says a pilot commits to his maneuver and holds his line. And there is the standard that says a pilot never spends a life he does not have to spend. Not a wingman's, not a stranger's, not 3 fuel section men who wandered onto your field at the wrong minute. You have told us all morning that the first is the standard. The Sky Marshal has just told us that the second is the one that held the sky over the Straits and brought my nephew home. So I will ask you plainly, in front of your cadets, since you are so concerned with what they learn. When the two standards meet on the same runway, which one does the Crown's Academy teach a pilot to choose?" Locke opened his mouth. He was not a stupid man, and he could see the trap, and he could see there was no answer to it that did not either sacrifice his whole case or say out loud, in front of 300 cadets and the King's sister and the Marshal of the Sky Command, that the Crown should train pilots to fly through ground crews for the sake of a formation. He hunted for a third path. He did not find one. And in the silence where his answer should have been, Corin Vale spoke, the first thing he had said in a long while, and he said it not to Locke and not to the princess, but to the Sky Marshal, quietly, almost gently, as if the two of them were alone. "Sir, he's not entirely wrong." The whole apron turned to him. "A standard that bends because a hero arrives is not a standard," Corin said. "The wing commander is right about that much, and the cadets should know I think so. I don't want to be reinstated because you came, Marshal. I told you at the palace I would earn the seat or not have it, and a seat handed to me over the top of the man who dismissed me is not earned. It's just a different kind of favor, the kind I've spent 6 years refusing." He turned his ruined face to the princess and inclined his head. "With respect, Your Highness, you can order the wing commander to write my name back on the roll. You cannot order him to be wrong about me, and you shouldn't have to. That has to be settled another way. And here I have thought about this for years, and I am still not sure whether it was pride or humility, and I have concluded it was the strange thing that lives where those two meet in a truly disciplined man." Corin Vale looked at Perrin Locke and made him an offer that took the whole morning and set it on a single point. "You said I fly as though afraid," Corin said. "You put it in writing and you read it to 300 people. So don't reinstate me, Wing Commander. Test me. You have your standard, bring it. Put me in an aircraft and set me any evaluation you like, any maneuver in the book or out of it, and you fly it too, off my wing or against me, however you want it, and let these cadets watch. And then you tell them, you, not the Marshal, not the princess, whether the old man flies as though afraid. If I fail your standard, I'll carry that paper out the gate at noon and you'll never hear my name again. If I meet it, you'll stand in front of your intake and read them a different assessment. That's a standard that doesn't bend. That's just a standard that finally gets applied. I have never in my life seen a man so completely destroyed by being given exactly what he claimed to want. Because Locke could not refuse. To refuse, to decline, in front of the Sky Marshal and the princess and 300 cadets, an offer to prove his own assessment in the air, would be to confess in front of all of them that he had written "flies as though afraid" about a man he did not dare fly against. And Locke was a showman and the son of showmen, and he had never in his gilded career had to actually fly against anything. And I watched the calculation move across his golden face, the frantic arithmetic of a man realizing that every road out of the room leads off a cliff. And then I watched him choose the cliff he thought he might survive, because a performer always believes the performance will save him. "Very well," Wing Commander Locke said, and he made himself smile, and it was a terrible smile, the smile of a man waving from the deck of a ship he has just felt strike the rocks. "Since the recruit is so eager, we'll settle it in the air as pilots. I'll fly my own aircraft and he can fly whatever the command cares to trust him with." He gestured, grand and contemptuous, at the great dark dart of the Stormcrest sitting silent on the apron behind Corin. Perhaps they'll let him sit in the beautiful jet. It's already landed once today without him. Let's see if it flies as well with a grounded man in the seat. He meant it as a sneer. He thought he was calling a bluff. He genuinely believed, I am certain of it, that Corin Vale could not fly that aircraft, that the hand alone made it impossible, that the whole thing was bluster, and that when it came to it the old man would have to decline, and the decline would hand lock back the morning. He did not know about the Ashfall turn. He did not know that of every living soul on that apron, of every pilot in the Crown's air service. There was exactly one who had ever taken that machine to its edge and come home, and that the man was standing 8 feet from him with a folded dismissal in his ruined hand. The Sky Marshal knew. I saw it move across that cliff of a face, not a smile, Cray was past smiling, but a kind of grim settling, the look of an old commander watching a battle arrive at last on ground of his own choosing. He turned to the test pilot who had climbed down from the Stormcrest, the young man still standing at his salute, and he said, "Is she fueled and green?" "Full and green, sir," the young pilot said. "She's ready to fly." "Then get Ashfall a suit and a helmet." The Sky Marshal looked at Corin, and for just a moment the iron went out of his voice, and something older and more tired came into it. The voice of a man who had pinned a medal on this same chest in a silent room 6 years ago, and had wondered every day since whether he had helped save a hero or only helped bury one alive. "Are you sure, son? No one on this field will think less of you if the hand says no. You've nothing left to prove to me. You proved it over the water." And Corin Vale, Ashfall, flexed his ruined right hand slowly, the 3 half-working fingers curling as far as they would go and no further, and looked at it the way you look at an old friend you are about to ask for one more impossible favor. And then he looked up at the great dark aircraft waiting on the apron, and something crossed his scarred face that I had not seen there in 3 weeks of watching him, something I can only call homecoming. "I have one thing left to prove, sir," he said, "not to you. To 300 young pilots who just watched a man be called a coward for saving 3 lives and half believed it. He looked once down the ranks of us, and I would swear his eyes found mine, though I have never been sure. They need to see which standard flies the jet." He handed the folded dismissal to the Sky Marshal, and he turned, and he walked back onto the flight line Perrin Locke had ordered him off of, toward the aircraft that only he in all the world could fly. They gave him 20 minutes. That is how long it takes to get a man out of a recruit's gray coveralls and into a pressure suit, to fit the helmet and check the seals and run the seat, and the ground crew who did it. The same trade whose 3 men he had climbed away from over the field, though I doubt he knew it, and I am certain he would not have cared. Did it with a speed and a silence that told me they had understood, faster than any of us cadets, exactly what they were dressing. Word moves through a ground crew the way water moves through sand. By the time they walked Corin Vale to the ladder of the Stormcrest, every man in coveralls on that apron stood a little straighter, and one old chief, the same one who had called the landing a courtesy, took off his cap. When Commander Locke walked to his own aircraft, a trainer, the sleek 2-seat advanced trainer that was the hottest thing the Academy owned, a genuinely capable machine that he flew genuinely well, and I do not want to take that from him, because it matters to the story that Locke was not a bad pilot. He was a good pilot who had never once been a great man, and he was about to be shown the difference at 4,000 feet in front of everyone he had ever wanted to impress. He climbed his ladder briskly, waved to the crowd, gave the cameras his profile. Corin Vale climbed his ladder slowly, favoring the hand, and did not wave, and did not look at anyone, and settled into the cockpit of the most advanced interceptor the kingdom had ever built, as a man settles into a chair by his own fire. The canopies came down. First the trainers, then, after a longer moment, the gold blister of the Stormcrest, and through it I could just see the dark shape of his helmet, still facing forward, the way I had seen him stand at the end of the front rank 100 times. Then the sound began. The trainer lit first, a clean rising whine, professional, familiar. And then the Stormcrest woke up, and it was not a whine. It was a thing out of the deep places of the earth, a hard climbing thunder that pressed on the chest and set the hangar glass singing all over again. And the great dark aircraft trembled against its brakes like a hound on a leash. And I understood in my body, before I understood it in my head, that these were not two aircraft of the same kind about to fly the same test. This was a Falcon and a very fine kite. They took the runway together, the trainer leading and rolled and lifted, the trainer clean and quick and the Stormcrest going up behind it with a violence of acceleration that snapped its gear closed and stood it into the gray sky in a climb so steep that a gasp ran the length of the muster. In seconds they were specks. The Sky Marshal had a handset now, patched to the tower and to the aircraft both, and he held it to his ear and repeated the exchanges for the princess, and whether he meant to or not, for the front ranks near enough to hear, so that we caught the shape of the thing as it happened overhead. The evaluation was Locke's to set. That had been the bargain, and Locke, to give him his due, did not set a soft one. He called for the full card, a high-speed pass and brake, a vertical rolling climb, a series of turns at increasing load, tighter and harder, the maneuvers by which you find the edge of a pilot's nerve, the edge past which most men ease off. And then at the end, the thing he thought would break the old man, the maneuver that had been in every cadet's mouth for 3 weeks because it was the one nobody in the intake could do cleanly, and Locke made us try it anyway. A maximum rate reversal at the top of a climb, the load coming on hard as the nose came down, the maneuver right at the ragged border of consciousness where the blood leaves the head and the vision grays, and a pilot has to fight his own body to hold the turn. Locke called it the ringer. He had no idea, none of us had any idea, that the engineers who built the Stormcrest had another name for the same place in the sky, and that they had named it after the man now flying above us. They ran the card, and here is what 300 cadets watched, craning our necks at 2 specks and a curl of vapor against a gray winter sky, listening to an old Marshal read out the tower's calls in a voice that got quieter and quieter as it went, the way a man's voice goes quiet in the presence of something he has waited a long time to see. The high pass. The trainer came through fast and sharp and pulled a clean break, and it was good, it was really good, and a few of Locke's junior instructors cheered. Then the Stormcrest came through, and it came through so much faster that the sound arrived late, tearing across the field a full second behind the shape of it, and it did not so much break as vanish, standing up onto one wing and clawing around the sky in an arc so tight that the vapor tore off its wingtips in white ribbons, and the cheer died in the instructors' throats. The vertical roll. Locke's trainer went up rolling, neat as a drill textbook, the kind of thing that wins airshow ribbons. The Stormcrest went up beside it and past it and kept going, rolling slower, almost lazily, because it did not need to hurry, and at the top it hung for an instant on its thundering tail and then fell off into exactly the line it wanted, and the ground crew chief beside me said, to no one in a kind of prayer, "He's not even trying yet." He wasn't. That was the thing that came clear as the card went on, tier by tier, turn by turn, that Corin Vale was not racing Locke, was not showing off, was not doing to Locke what Locke had done to him. He was simply, precisely, disciplinedly meeting every single item on the standard Locke had set, exactly to its mark and not 1 degree past, and the fact that meeting it looked like a god at play while Locke's honest best looked like a talented boy was not something Corin was doing. It was just the truth, becoming visible, at 4,000 feet, the way the Sky Marshal had promised it would. The turns tightened. Locke, I think, had begun to understand by now that he could not win, and a smaller man in a losing race reaches for the throttle, and Locke reached for it. He hauled his trainer into the turns harder than the card called for, chasing, trying to force the old man to overreach, and the tower's calls in the Sky Marshal's mouth started to carry a warning edge. A note about load, about margin, about the trainer's limits, which are real limits, because a trainer is not a stormcrest and cannot be flown like one no matter how badly its pilot wants to. And Corin Vale, up there in the aircraft that could have flown Locke into the ground without effort, did the last thing anyone expected and the only thing that a truly great man could have done. He matched Locke's honest limit and refused to exceed it. He held his turns to the trainer's envelope, no tighter, flying the whole back half of the car down at the level of the lesser aircraft, so that Locke would not be tempted past his own margin chasing him. Protecting in the air, at the top of the sky, in the middle of the man's own humiliation, the very pilot who had called him a coward. I did not understand what I was seeing until the Sky Marshal said it, half to himself, into the space between two tower calls. "He's flying Locke's aircraft for him," the old Marshal murmured. "He's holding the boy inside his own limits so he doesn't kill himself trying to keep up." And then, lower still, God help me, 6 years, and he hasn't changed at all. Then came the ringer, the last item. The maximum rate reversal at the top of the climb, the maneuver that grayed a cadet's vision and that Locke had set at the end because he believed it would be the place the old man's body finally failed him, the hand or the years or the load, and the whole thing would collapse into the decent excuse of he tried, but he's grounded, it can't be helped. Locke went first. He took the trainer up and hauled it over into the reversal, and he flew it honestly, right at his aircraft's edge and his own. A strong, brave, entirely creditable piece of flying that would have earned any cadet a mark of distinction, and the load whited his voice out on the radio for a second at the bottom of it, the grunt of a man fighting the blood down out of his own skull, and he came out of it low and breathing hard and, I think, secretly proud, because it was the best he had, and it was good. And then Corin Vale flew the Ashfall turn. I have heard test pilots try to describe it and give up. I can only tell you what 300 of us saw from the ground. The storm crest went up and up, standing on that impossible thunder, and at the top where Locke had wrenched his trainer over into a hard, honest reversal, the storm crest did not wrench anything. It rotated smooth, total, the nose coming down through the vertical and the whole aircraft reversing its line in a single continuous motion that looked, from the ground, less like a maneuver than like the sky itself folding over, and the vapor came off it in a spiral, a white helix wound around the aircraft's own axis, and it came down out of the top of the climb already pointed exactly where it wanted to go and accelerating. The load through that turn, the flight surgeon told me this later. Having read the recorder, the load through that turn was half again what had grayed Locke's vision, half again what the medical board 6 years earlier had written that Corin Vale's body could never survive. And he flew it with a ruined right hand, and did not black out and did not ease off, and came out the bottom of it laid dead level 50 feet over the estuary, and pulled up into a slow victory climb that was not a boast, that was only a man letting an aircraft breathe. And the sound of it rolled across the water and hit the apron, and 300 cadets made a noise I have never heard a crowd make before or since. Not a cheer, not exactly, but a single ragged exhalation. The sound of a great many people understanding something enormous all at the same instant. The Sky Marshal lowered the handset. He did not need it anymore. And Princess Adela, who had watched the whole card in silence with her clear eyes on the sky, turned and looked at Wing Commander Perrin, Locke's junior instructors, the ones who had cheered, and then stopped cheering, and she said, in a voice pitched to carry no further than the reviewing party but heard, I promise you, by everyone who mattered, I believe the recruit has met the standard. Would anyone care to argue that he flies as though afraid? No one cared to argue it. The two aircraft came around for the break and the landing, the trainer first, honest and tired, and then the Stormcrest, which crossed the field one last time low and unhurried and stood up on its wing in that impossible farewell turn, and came around and settled onto the runway as gently as it had the first time. A courtesy. A machine returning a man to the earth it had lifted him from 20 minutes and 6 years before. What happened on the apron after he shut the engine down has been told and retold at Wren's Reach so many times that I no longer fully trust my own memory of it against the legend. But I will give you the parts I am sure of, because I was there for them, and the legend, for once, is smaller than the truth. The Stormcrest rolled to its stop in front of the hangar, and the canopy came up, and Corin Vale climbed down the ladder slowly, favoring the hand, exactly as he had climbed up. And when his boots touched the tarmac, he did not raise his arms or turn to the crowd or do any of the things Locke would have done. He took off his helmet and tucked it under his arm and stood there, scarred and gray and entirely calm, a man who had just flown a maneuver the medical service had sworn would kill him, looking mildly for someone to tell him where to put the equipment. And 300 cadets broke ranks. I want to be honest about this, because the instructors never gave the order and afterward pretended they had. We broke ranks. The whole intake, all of us. The discipline coming apart at the seams as we crowded off the muster line toward the aircraft and the man. And the noise we made was not a drill and not a ceremony. It was 300 young people who had watched a legend be called a coward to his face at 9 in the morning and had believed it, and had spent the last half hour learning in the most spectacular way a human being can be taught what it costs to have the wrong eyes. Some of the cadets were crying. I will admit that I was one of them. We did not know what to do with what we were feeling, so we did the only thing bodies know how to do with it, which is to move toward the source, and the ground crews moved with us. And the old chief who had taken off his cap got to Corin first and gripped his ruined hand in both of his and could not say anything at all. Corin Vale looked at the crowd of us swarming toward him, and for the first time in 3 weeks I saw him at a loss. He had known exactly what to do when they called him a coward. He had no idea at all what to do with this. He said to the nearest cadets a little helplessly, "You should be in ranks," and no one obeyed him, and something in his scarred face very slowly came undone, and he let it. Wing Commander Locke climbed down from his trainer into a world that had ended. No one was looking at him. That, for a man like Locke, was the whole of the sentence, passed and served in a single instant. Not the disgrace that came later, not the board of inquiry, not the quiet removal from the academy's charter that the court arranged before the month was out, but that one moment on the apron when he walked toward the crowd expecting it to part for him, and it did not so much as notice he was there. He stopped at the edge of it. He looked at the man he had called furniture, being wept over by 300 cadets and saluted by the Marshal of the Sky Command, and I watched Locke understand, all at once and far too late, the exact size of the thing he had done, and the exact size of the man he had done it to. And I will tell you that I felt something for him in that moment that surprised me, because it is a terrible thing to watch even a cruel man learn that he has spent his life being small. He had one card left and he tried to play it because that is what performers do. He raised his voice over the crowd, the carrying voice, cracked now, and he said, "This changes nothing about the standard. One flight in a jet the rest of us aren't cleared for, that's not training, that's a stunt, and I'll be filing." And the Sky Marshal turned and looked at him, just looked at him, and Locke's carrying voice ran out of road and stopped. "You'll be filing nothing, Wing Commander," the Sky Marshal said, "without heat, which was worse than heat. Except your report to the board that will convene about your conduct at this academy, which I will be requesting before I leave this apron. You called a man a coward for saving 3 lives. You read it to 300 cadets, and you built it into their assessments and their instincts, and that is not a disagreement about standards. That is the corruption of the young, which is the one thing this service exists to prevent. Go and wait in your office." And Locke, golden, gilded, the Queen Consort's chosen face of her most expensive project, went and waited in his office and walked out of the story, and I have kept my promise to myself never to spend more words on him than the tale requires, so that is nearly the last of them. I say nearly, because there is the matter of the academy itself, and of whose name was on the charter, and here the story reaches up past the apron and into the court, and I only know the shape of it from what Faraday told me and what became public later. The academy at Wren's Reach was the Queen Consort's project, her prestige, her patronage, her vision of a crown that produced the finest and the most beautiful pilots in the world, cameras and airshows and pedigree, and Perrin Locke was precisely the pilot she had wanted the world to see when it looked at what she had built. That was why he was there. That was why a man who had never flown anything more dangerous than a display had been made flight master of the Crown's flagship school, because he looked like the story the Queen Consort wanted told. And the reason Corin Vale's presence had been such a threat to Locke, the reason a scarred, quiet, hard-handed old recruit had to be washed out fast and publicly, was that he was the living refutation of the whole glittering premise, proof that the thing that flies the jet and holds the sky and brings the crown prince home is not pedigree, and is not beauty and does not photograph well, but is instead exactly the unglamorous, unshowable, uncrownable quality that a queen consort building a monument to herself has no use for at all. The court sorted it out over the following weeks in the quiet way courts do, and the queen consort's name came off the academy's charter in a reorganization that the announcements described as routine, and everyone at Wren's Reach understood to be nothing of the kind, and it was replaced by a plainer arrangement under the Sky Command and the patronage of the Princess Adela, who had stood on the apron and asked the one question Locke could not answer. But all of that was later and settled by others, and I set it down only so you know that the wrong was not merely felt on the flight line that morning, but was put right in the places where wrongs are actually undone. On the apron, in the moment, none of us were thinking about charters. We were watching the last car come through the gate, because there was one more, and everyone had assumed the Sky Marshal and the Princess were the whole of the party, and everyone was wrong. The king came. I do not know how the word had reached him or how fast he had traveled, and it does not matter. What matters is that a fourth car came onto the apron without escort or fanfare, and King Alaric got out of it, in a plain dark coat with no decoration at all, and the crowd of us that no order had been able to hold in ranks fell back and formed them again on its own, out of pure instinct, 300 cadets remembering all at once who they were. The king walked out across the tarmac past the muster and past the reviewing party, and Princess Adela went to meet her brother and said something to him low that I could not hear, and the king listened with his eyes on the scarred gray man standing by the aircraft, and then King Alaric crossed the last of the distance alone and stopped in front of Corin Vale. For a moment the two of them only looked at each other, and then the King of Eldermore did the thing that is spoken of at Wren's Reach to this day, the thing that no protocol required, and that no one who saw it has ever forgotten. He reached out and took Corin Vale's ruined right hand, the claw of it, the 3 half-working fingers that would not close, the hand that had held an aircraft through fire over the Straits, so that a boy named Rowan would grow up to be the crown prince. And King Alaric raised that hand between both of his own and bowed his head over it. "My son flew home on this hand," the king said. His voice was not steady. He did not try to make it steady. "For 6 years I have known your name and been forbidden to say it, and I have watched you stand a gate in my palace and let 1,000 strangers a day look through you, and I have said nothing because you asked for nothing and because the reasons were real. They are not real anymore." He lowered the hand gently, but he did not let go of it. "This morning, a man in my service called you a coward, and 300 of the young people I am supposed to be raising up to defend this crown believed him, because we hid from them the one truth that would have taught them how to see. That was my failure, guardsmen, not yours and not theirs, and I have come to fix it in front of them, because a thing broken in public has to be mended in public, or it does not mend at all." And then the king turned, still holding that ruined hand, and faced the 300 of us, and he raised his voice, a king's voice, made for exactly this, and he lifted the seal. He told us the name. He told us the call sign. He told us the Straits, in words a little fuller than the Sky Marshal had dared, because it was the king's to tell, and he ended it by saying that the highest decoration the crown could bestow had been pinned on this chest 6 years ago in a room with the curtains drawn and no one to see it, and that this here now, on a cold apron in front of the men and women who would fly for the crown after him, was where it should have been given, and that from this day the record would say so. "You have been asking," the king said, "since you were old enough to want the sky, what a pilot of the crown is. Stop looking at the ones who photograph well. Look at this man. He is the answer. He was standing at the end of your front rank the whole time, and you could not see him, and neither could we, and that is the most important lesson you will learn at this academy, so learn it now. The thing you are trying to become does not announce itself. It climbs away from the cameras to save 3 men you'll never meet. Be that. Nothing else is flying for the crown. Everything else is just an air show." I have carried those words for a long time. I have repeated them to my own cadets, now that I am old enough to have cadets, and I watch their faces the way, I suppose, Corin Vale must have watched ours, looking for the ones who understand and the ones who only think they do. They offered him everything, of course. That afternoon, in the flight master's office that Locke had been sent out of, the Sky Marshal and the princess laid it in front of him plainly. The Stormcrest program was his if he wanted it. Not a recruit's seat, the whole thing. The chief test post, the authority to shape how the aircraft would be flown and taught, the rank to go with it, the sealed years unsealed, and every honor that had been owed him for 6 years paid at once with interest. The medical board's grounding would be quietly set aside. A man who had just flown the Ashfall turn with a ruined hand had made their paperwork into a joke. He could have his life in the sky back, the one the Straits had taken from him, and this time in the finest aircraft the kingdom had ever built, with the king's own gratitude at his back. Any pilot who ever lived would have wept to be offered 1/10 of it. Corin Vale asked for a night to think. That is the part I understood least, at 19, and understand best now. Any of us would have said yes on the apron with the engine still ticking. He asked for a night, and in the morning he gave the Sky Marshal his answer, and it was not the answer anyone expected, and it is the reason I am telling you this story instead of some other one. He said he would fly for the program, but not as its glory, and not for its rank. He would take the test seat, because the aircraft needed the one man alive who could teach it, and a man does not refuse a duty he is the only one able to do. He had learned that lesson standing a gate for 6 years, and he had not forgotten it in an afternoon. But he would not take the parade with it. He asked that the sealed decoration stay quiet in his own keeping, made real in the record, but not paraded through the newspapers, because he had seen what a public hero had nearly cost the crown once, and he had watched, that very morning, what the wanting of the cameras had made of a man like Locke, and he would not become the new beautiful face on a new expensive charter. And above all, this is the part I hold on to, he asked to keep his post. His guardsman's post. He asked that one day a week, when the flying schedule allowed, he be permitted to stand his old watch at the palace gate in the red tunic and the tall bearskin, with the rifle in the hand that would never fully close, and be looked through by 1,000 strangers and say nothing, and ask for nothing, because that stillness, he told the Sky Marshal, was where he had learned everything that had kept him alive over the Straits. And a man who forgets the discipline of standing still forgets how to be trusted with the discipline of moving fast, and he did not intend to forget either one. They gave it to him. The king himself signed the arrangement, and for the rest of the years I knew him, the greatest combat pilot the kingdom ever produced spent 6 days a week teaching the future how to fly the Stormcrest, and 1 day a week standing motionless at a palace gate, and the visitors who filmed the still gray-eyed guardsman with the scarred jaw and the curled right hand never knew, not one of them, that they were photographing the man whose hand their crown prince had flown home on. He liked it that way. I asked him once, years later, when I had earned the right to ask him things, why he kept the gate when he could have had the sky and the glory both. He thought about it for a long time, the way he thought about everything, and then he said, because the gate is where I remember that the flying was never the point. The people behind me were the point. You can forget that at 4,000 feet a lot easier than you can forget it standing still with a rifle you can barely hold, watching families walk past your boots all day. He looked at his ruined hand. The hand keeps me honest. So does the gate. I'd be a worse pilot without both of them, and I've been a bad enough one already. He had never been a bad one. He had been the best one, and the most disciplined, and the least seen, all at the same time, which I have come to believe are not three different things but one thing wearing three faces. I have told you I was standing 40 paces from the man when they threw him off the flight line and did not know what I was looking at. That is true, and it is my shame, and I have tried to make it useful. Here is what I tell my cadets on the last morning of every evaluation week, standing on the same cold apron with the same flags cracking on the mast. I tell them that on this ground once, a wing commander with every advantage in the world looked at the finest pilot the crown ever made and saw a coward, because the pilot would not perform, would not boast, would not spend a life he did not have to spend for the sake of a formation and a camera. And I tell them that on this ground that same morning, a sky marshal and a princess and a king looked at the same still gray man and saw a legend, because they had learned to read the one thing the young and the vain never can, that the deepest thing in a person does not come to the surface to be admired. It stays down where the work is. It climbs away from the cameras. It stands the gate. It holds the sky for 11 minutes over cold water so that a boy can grow up to be a king, and then it goes and stands a watch and lets the world look through it for 6 more years and asks for nothing. And then I point at the sky, where there is always, on evaluation morning, one aircraft up high running the card, a Stormcrest now flown by pilots he trained, and their students after them. And I tell my cadets the last thing, the only thing that matters, the thing I did not have the eyes to see when I was one of them, and the thing I have given the rest of my life to teaching. Do not ask which pilot flies the most beautifully. Ask which one would climb away to save 3 men you'll never meet. That one is flying for the crown. Everything else, as the king said on this apron on the coldest morning of my life, is just an air show. His name was Corin Vale. His call sign was Ashfall. He touched down behind the man who called him a coward and let the aircraft speak for him, because he had learned, long before any of us, that the truest things never need to raise their voice. They only need, once in a great while, to be allowed to land.